Would you agree with me that there are some things in life that are obvious? Would you agree? Okay, good. Because if you don't, we're off to a bad start. For instance, if you left your dog at home and you came home after being out and noticed that your couch was ripped to shreds, would it be obvious that probably your dog doesn't like being left alone? Would that be fair? Would that be obvious to you? Or how about if you forgot to close your sunroof one day and you experienced a very bad snowstorm? You forgot to close your sunroof, you had a bad snowstorm, and then when you walked out the next morning, would it be obvious that you had about 2 feet of snow and something's obviously wrong because you have 2 feet of snow in your car? Does anyone remember this story? This was about 2 years ago, this poor unfortunate woman in St. John's, Newfoundland. This actually happened 2 years ago. One of the worst snowstorms they had all year, and she left her sunroof open. Or would it be obvious to you, particularly with the beautiful fall weather that we've had in Nova Scotia, we're very fortunate, that Nova Scotia is a beautiful province to live in? Amen? Amen. Some things in life are obvious. In our gospel, Jesus sat down across from the treasury and he watched people come and go. He watched them putting their offerings into the large treasury boxes. Now, I don't know if you've ever seen these things before, but the treasury boxes were made of metal. The top was made of metal. It's sort of like a trumpet almost at the top. So as you put money into it, it would sort of funnel in, and then down into the base of it is actually made of wood. And there were 13 of these things spread all around the temple. And people would come and give their offering to the treasury in one of these boxes. Now, I want you to appreciate the noise that one of these things would make. Because back then, obviously, all currency was made of metal. And you're taking metal and pouring it into something that is also made of metal. The noise would, as there are 13 in the temple, would be really loud. You can imagine that rich people would draw attention to themselves, because obviously the richer you were, the more you contributed to the treasury, the louder the sound. Right? That would be obvious. And the rich called attention to themselves as they would pour large sums of money into the treasury. And you might say that the louder the noise, the more generous the offering. You know, that noise of coins meeting something hard on a hard surface reminds me of when I was a treasurer at a job a long time ago. We had vending machines in our lunchroom. So every couple of weeks, I had to take all the coin, of course, and try and roll it. Do you remember rolling coin, taking it to the bank? We used to use this little machine. I don't know, has anyone ever seen one of these things? Are you familiar with them? Well, this thing was made of hard plastic, and it only took the coins, of course, and back then there were no loonies or toonies. Pennies, nickels, dimes, quarters, that's all it took. So you grabbed a hand of coin, if you're not familiar with this thing, and you held it up at the top, and you dropped it, and it would go bang, bang, bang as it went back and forth across, and then it would finally settle in the bottom. And then once the bottom was filled up enough, you would take it and roll it and bring it to the bank. I can't imagine if I had 13 of these things in a room all at the same time, because this thing was loud. It made an awful lot of noise. And I can't help but think that it's probably very close to what the temple would sound like as the wealthy and the rich and others would come in and make their donations to the treasury. Jesus, he sat and watched people as they come and go, and he sees this poor widow coming to give her offering. And she would not be obvious to the rich. They would pay no attention to her at all. She was probably hoping not to be noticed by anybody, as she felt uncomfortable in the presence of such wealth. A woman of very minor means, simple means, for she knew that she didn't belong. This woman might be considered invisible to most there, but not to Jesus. To her, her generosity, her humility, and her tremendous heart was very obvious to him. And Jesus takes note of her, so much so that he calls his disciples over. And he says, look at that poor widow. She has given more to the treasury than all of those who are contributing to the treasury, because they have given out of their abundance, out of their access, out of what they have left over. But she gave out of her poverty. And she put in everything she had, all that she had to live on. And I would suggest to you that she probably gave more than what she could afford to give. Because I think if my instant reaction, perhaps, if I was even there to begin with, if all I had were 2 copper coins left, I might give 1 to the treasury and keep 1 for myself. Because what this poor widow did was put everything she had into the treasury, so much so she didn't even know where her next meal was coming from. She gave out of her poverty all that she had to live on. And then you can imagine the sound that those coins, those 2 little tiny copper coins, might make as they hit that metal top on the treasury box. It would probably go something like this: tink, tink, and that would be it. So much so that you probably wouldn't even notice the sound of those 2 copper coins as she gave to the treasury all that she had. So Jesus, he says he knew the richness of her gift because it was obvious to him. Because when Jesus sees the widow and all the noise and the chaos, as rich people came and went, he calls his friends to him and he says, look what this poor widow just did. The gift of the poor woman came from her heart. That is what Jesus noticed. She gave out of her poverty. It came straight from her heart because she trusted in the goodness of God to care for her. The wealthy visited the treasury and gave what they had left over. Their hearts were not in it. Patty and I live in the west end of Halifax, just on the other side of the bridge, and we have a young man in our neighborhood, and he doesn't have a lot. In fact, he has very little. So what he tries to do is mow lawns and shovel driveways and rake leaves and so on to try and earn a little bit of money, because I know he's always desperate. He needs help. And every once in a while, when there's not a lawn to be mowed or leaves to be raked, he just knocks on the door and he says, can you spare a few dollars? And this one particular time, he came looking for $10. Now, this was about 8 or 9 years ago. And this one time, we did not have any money in the house. I couldn't even offer him a couple of loonies if I had them. But as we sat and talked to this man, he's in his late 30s, early 40s. As we sat and talked to him, or stood at the doorway and spoke to him, my wife, Patty, feels something in her hand. And Patrick, our boy, who would have been, probably 11 or 12 at the time, he ran upstairs and got $10 of his own money and pushed it into Patty's hand. Now, 2 things strike me about that. I expect all of our children are fairly generous. The first one is, Patrick didn't have to think about donating or giving to this man. He knew instinctively that somebody needed help. And he did not hesitate to run upstairs and get $10 of his own money. We didn't give our kids a lot of money. So it would certainly have been a very sacrificial gift of Patrick to give him this money. And secondly, the thing that strikes me the most is he didn't want the man to know where it was coming from. He hid behind Patty and just simply pushed it into her hand. Because I think he was concerned that if a 40-year-old man looking for money had to take $10 from a 12-year-old kid, he probably wouldn't take it. Patrick knew he needed the money. Second Corinthians chapter 9 says this: each of you should give what you have decided in your heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. There needs to be an emotional connection to our giving. Sacrificial giving, as we see in our gospel, does not mean the size or amount of our gift. The wealthy who visited the treasury gave great sums of money, but their hearts were not in it. The widow donated 2 small copper coins, an insignificant amount of money when it came to the monetary value. But if you compare it with the wealthy givers, she gave everything that she had. This difference was very obvious to Jesus. So, how do we apply this story to our own lives? We could apply it to, I would suggest, anything we offer. If we offer our time to our spouse, if we offer our undivided attention to our children or our grandchildren, help to a colleague or a coworker who needs help, service to your community, your expertise to a coworker, and yes, perhaps even a monetary donation to your parish. As many of you know, all charities have struggled with donations in the past 2 years. And on a positive note, here at Our Lady of Guadalupe, our parish income is up 6%. That is the good news. The bad news is that we are still well short from what we budgeted for 2020. And this is primarily due to our expectation, as all of you would imagine, because it's in your own life, that this pandemic would be long gone in our rearview mirror. But that's not the case. So here's the ask. The ask is if you would spend time with our gospel this week and ask yourself 2 questions. The first one is, when's the last time that I prayerfully considered how and what I give to the parish, to my parish? And do I consider what and how I give sacrificial, or do I give to God whatever's left over? Jesus looked into the heart of the poor widow. It was obvious to him that her offering was sacrificial, coming from her poverty. The question is, what does he see when he looks into our hearts as we give?